What is up, fellas? It is week 9, which means we are tackling all of the biggest fantasy football matchups, going through every game, all 15 of them. We got 2 teams on bye this week, talking about the over-unders, the spreads, the implied totals, everything you guys will need to know to set your fantasy football lineups this week, and some of the key matchups, shadow coverage, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and some streamers at the end of the video, quarterback, tight end, defense, and kicker. So let's get things kicked off with Thursday Night Football, the first game that we have on tap for the week. The Houston Texans traveling to New York to face against the New York Jets. We do have the Jets actually favored in this game by 2 points, which to me feels like a complete trap because everybody's going to bet the Texans and then the Jets might end up winning, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see what happens tonight. The over-under is 42 points, the over catching 90% of the steam right now, which is a pretty high total. Pace of play is pretty average. DVOA matchups, the Jets DVOA on offense versus the Texans DVOA on defense presents a pretty big disadvantage for the Jets offense, and then about an average matchup for the Houston offense, although keep in mind, they are without Stephon Diggs, and they are still without Nico Collins. So talking about some of the key matchups in this game, things that we want to pay attention to when we're setting our fantasy football lineups, both quarterbacks have bottom 12 matchups. So for me, I would not start either quarterback in this game. Stroud without his top 2 receivers, and Aaron Rodgers in a tough matchup against the Houston Texans. Breece Hall going up against the 3rd-ranked Houston Texans run defense. Of course, he's still in your lineup, but temper expectations for his production output tonight. Joe Mixon versus the New York Jets run defense, on the other hand, is a very good matchup for him. He's gone over 100 total yards in every game that he's played healthy without getting injured in against the Bears on Sunday Night Football in Week 3. Every other game, he's been over 100 total yards. He's been an absolute monster from a volume standpoint. Tank Dell going up against the Jets secondary. That is the 8th toughest matchup for fantasy wide receivers this week. And then Wilson and Adams going up against the Texans secondary, on the other hand, is the 22nd hardest matchup. So an easier, favorable one for those guys. Dalton Schultz, tough matchup there. Maybe not the greatest streaming tight end this week, but Kaimi Fairbairn, if you're looking for a kicker tonight, definitely a very good option. He is the number 3 ranked kicker on the season, and I probably wouldn't mess with the Jets defense, even though they're favored and at home. I just don't really trust that matchup, and I also don't trust the Texans defense against the Jets because they do have the talent to be able to score points on that side of the ball. So breaking down the Sunday main slate here, we do have 8 games at 1 p.m. on Sunday, then 4 games at 4 p.m. on Sunday, of course, a Sunday night game, and then a Monday night game. Pretty bog standard, regular old week this week, starting with the Cowboys at Atlanta Falcons. This is the highest scoring game on the slate, 52-point over-under. The Falcons are 3-point home favorites, so basically a neutral pick 'em on a neutral field here. The Falcons offense implied for 27.5 points, Dallas for 24.5, given the high total. High pace of play, fastest of the slate. And also the Atlanta Falcons offense going up a very advantageous matchup against the Dallas Cowboys defense. On the other hand, probably not a good matchup for the Cowboys offense, so keep that in mind. Key matchups to pay attention to. Both quarterbacks do have top 10 matchups, so you can definitely play Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins. Both are inside my top 12 quarterbacks for the week. Bijan Robinson against the Dallas run defense. That is a very, very favorable matchup for him, so look for him to have a monster game yet again. He's been on a tear as of late. Kyle Pitts and Drake London against the Dallas pass defense. Also very favorable matchups for those guys. Start all of your Atlanta Falcons, basically, is the takeaway here. CeeDee Lamb is expected to see shadow coverage versus A.J. Terrell. Terrell been a little up and down this season. I would say that it's definitely not a favorable matchup having shadow coverage against a good corner, but CeeDee Lamb is good enough to beat A.J. Terrell when he gets his opportunities. And then also to stream both tight ends and kickers, Pitts and Jake Ferguson, both top 8 tight ends for me in my rankings this week, and Brandon Aubrey and Younghoe Koo, both top 5 kickers for me in my rankings as well. So just basically start everybody in that game, including if you needed some spare parts there at the wide receiver and running back position. So Broncos at Raiders, the next game that we're going to talk about here. The Ravens are 9.5-point home favorites against the Broncos, which to me feels a little bit high because the Broncos have been playing pretty well, playing pretty tight games with a lot of people. Over-under is actually 45.5 points, which is rather high for a Broncos defense that has actually been historically good to start the year. Through the first, 8 games or so, EPA per play, a bunch of advanced metrics. They're like a top defense of the last 25 years. So they've been very, very good getting after the quarterback. Every one of their pass rushers an above average pass rush win rate, and they have the best cornerback in the NFL with Patrick Surtain. Over under, like I said, is 45.5, over catching 93% of the cash there. Baltimore DVOA advantage matchup there for them, top 5 on the slate, even though the Broncos defense is very good. The Ravens offense has been equally as good. It's strength on strength here in this game. Key matchups to pay attention to. Bo Nix against the Baltimore pass defense is a very favorable matchup there, so definitely a streamable quarterback if you have somebody on bye this week or if you're just looking for a better option from what you currently have. Bo Nix, definitely a usable quarterback. Lamar Jackson, very tough matchup, as I mentioned. First-ranked Broncos defense against fantasy quarterbacks. Both running backs have bottom 10 matchups too, so expect maybe some tough sledding for Derrick Henry and for Javonte Williams in this one. You're definitely still starting Derrick Henry, but temper expectations. Javonte Williams, definitely not a must start if you have better options. Zay Flowers is expected to see shadow coverage from Patrick Surtain. We'll have to wait and see how the Deontay Johnson addition to the Ravens offense affects how they operate as an offense, whether they're going more pass heavy, whether Deontay is going to play a whole lot this week. We don't exactly know. I would probably leave Deontay on your bench if you can help it, because I don't really think he's going to get in there and play more than 50-60% of the snaps, and I don't really want to start that against the Denver Broncos defense as good as they are. And then if you do need some other low-end flex pieces and streamers, you can definitely throw Courtland Sutton into your lineup, I think, this week, given the matchup. You could maybe mess around with other Broncos pass catchers. I probably wouldn't screw around with Troy Franklin or anybody else there. Mark Andrews, definitely a streamable tight end as well. And the Ravens defense, definitely streamable, given the point total. Like I said, I think it's a little too high of a 9.5 point spread, but the Ravens are at home. They've been a good team. Bo Nix and the Broncos offense has played some Mickey Mouse defenses the last couple of weeks, and I do think that the Ravens defense could get after him a little bit. Moving into the Dolphins at Bills, very crucial game for the Miami Dolphins. Otherwise, their season is pretty much over. The Bills are 6-point home favorites, which, I think is a little bit high given the stakes that this game represents for the Dolphins. Buffalo implied for almost 28 points. Miami implied for almost 22. Second highest over-under game of the slate, 49.5, over catching 98% of the money, which is first on the slate. And then the pace of play, also top 5. Buffalo offense versus the Miami defense. That is the second biggest advantage. And again, take with a grain of salt the Miami DVOA data there, because that mostly came without Tua Tagovailoa in the lineup. I think we can all agree that they're a much better offense when he's out there. Some key matchups to pay attention to. Both quarterbacks have bottom 8 matchups. So even though the over-under total is very, very high in this one, I actually like it to go through James Cook and Devon Achane, both running backs having top 12 matchups against the run there. Devon Achane probably going to catch a lot of passes. James Cook definitely had a big game. Both of these guys had a big game the first time that these two teams played. James Cook had a monster game on that Thursday night win for the Bills, the game that Tua was knocked out in, and Devon Achane just did work as a receiving back in that game. Both wide receiver cores, like I said, have tough matchups, bottom 12 matchups for Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and for Amari Cooper, Keon Coleman, and Khalil Shakir. Again, I think given the over-under, you're probably still starting most of those players. But keep in mind, if you do have a player with better matchups or similarly high game scoring environments, you could definitely go in different directions there. Dalton Kincaid versus the Miami pass defense, that's a tough matchup as well. 7th hardest against fantasy tight ends. If you're looking for defense and kicker streamers, I think the Buffalo Bills definitely could be an option, because the Dolphins offense is still, finding their sea legs, and Tua Tagovailoa hasn't played a whole lot this year. And then both kickers definitely in play for this matchup given the over-under. So moving on to the Saints at Panthers. The Saints are 7.5-point road favorites. It looks like Vegas is expecting Derek Carr to be back, as is the case for most of the fantasy community. I think it's been kind of well documented that Derek Carr would be back this week, given what most fantasy doctors have said. It sounds like he's practicing right now. So it looks like the New Orleans Saints should have their starting quarterback back, which thank God, because they were an absolute unwatchable mess prior to that. The Saints offensive DVOA has a nice advantage over the Panthers defense. Not a very great game environment overall. The under is catching most of the steam in this game, and it's 43.5 points. Wasn't super high to begin with. Key matchups to pay attention to. Derek Carr against the Carolina pass defense, 31st easiest matchup. I probably don't think you need to dig as deep as Derek Carr would be down the quarterback streamer list. I'm going to talk about 5 quarterback streamers at the end of this video, and a lot of them are just better options than what Derek Carr represents. But I suppose if you were really screwed, or if it's a super flex league or something, Derek Carr definitely a very good matchup this week. Both running backs have top 5 matchups, so Alvin Kamara, great matchup, and Chuba Hubbard / Jonathan Brooks, because it looks like he's probably going to make his debut this week. Definitely good matchups there. The only thing that's a little bit sketchy about the Panthers backfield is how much is Brooks used. Can we start Brooks? Can we start Hubbard? We don't really know exactly, although it is a good matchup, like I said. Chris Olave versus the Carolina secondary, very easy matchup for him there. Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette versus the Saints secondary, about a league average matchup. If you need a streaming tight end, I think Jawan Johnson's not a half bad option. He is coming off of a concussion, but he should be ready to go. He's already cleared the protocol. And then New Orleans defense and New Orleans kicker, both inside my top 5 to 10 at that position. So definitely usable streamers there as well. Bengals at Raiders, another big time spread. A lot of these games that we're going to see this week, big time swings, big time spreads. The last ones that we've talked about, the last 3 in a row, have been over a touchdown favorite for the team that was favored there. The Bengals traveling to Las Vegas. They're favored by 7.5 points. Over under of 46.5. So sneaky high total here. Over of 95% of the money going to the over in this game. The Bengals need to get on track here. They absolutely have to win this game to keep their season alive. They have the 7th easiest matchup in terms of DVOA of their offense versus the Raiders defense. I expect a big-time Bengals get-right game here, hopefully with T. Higgins back on the field. But regardless, you are starting Joe Burrow, you are starting Jamar Chase, and then Higgins if he is healthy. Both quarterbacks have top 12 matchups, so even Gardner Minshew should be able to move the ball on the other side of the field there. Chase Brown versus the Vegas run defense is a top 3 matchup for fantasy running backs. Alexander Mattison, tough matchup against the Bengals, but I think the overall scoring environment of this game lends itself to Mattison catching some passes here. And then Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers versus the Cincinnati defense, 21st against the pass. Chase and Higgins against the Raiders pass defense, 17th against the pass there. So high-scoring game environment, definitely start all of your studs from that one, and I think you can even dig deep on guys like Jacoby Myers and Chase Brown and Alexander Mattison if you need to, because they are in really, really good spots in those matchups there. So Chargers at Browns, the Chargers 1.5 point favorites on the road, so a little bit of a closer game as opposed to the ones that we've talked about so far. Pretty brutal game environment, 43-point over not catching that much of the steam relative to the rest of the games. Pace of play is pretty low. The Chargers offense definitely about an average matchup, and then Cleveland's offense versus the Chargers defense. It's a brutal matchup for them, and Jameis Winston is definitely better than the numbers that Deshaun Watson and the Browns offense have put up this year, but regardless, it's still going to be a bit of a tough spot there. Some of the key matchups to pay attention to, both quarterbacks, I probably wouldn't mess with them. I know Jameis Winston's intriguing. I know Justin Herbert's intriguing, but I just think there's better options this week, so I wouldn't mess around starting those guys. Both running backs have bottom 10 matchups, so keep that in mind for Nick Chubb and for J.K. Dobbins, that it might be tough sledding on the ground. Nick Chubb definitely worth a buy low right now, given the usage ramp up that we've seen from him over the last 2 games. Ladd McConkey on the outside, or in the slot, going up against Greg Newsome. That is the 24th easiest defense to go up against the pass, and Greg Newsome has been their worst corner of that group, and McConkey is their best receiver, so that could be a matchup to exploit. McConkey, of course, coming off of a monster game with Justin Herbert and the Chargers there. Browns wide receivers versus the Los Angeles cornerbacks. I wouldn't mess with them. I know Cedric Tillman's been great. I know Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore got targets, but this seems to be one of those spots where it's a big-time letdown. Everybody talking about, Cedric Tillman could be a trap waiver ad, or, Elijah Moore or Jerry Jeudy could be trap waiver ads. I don't feel very, very confident in those guys. If you needed to start Cedric Tillman, who is the one that I would start of the 3, as a top 45 receiver, I think that's fine, but I wouldn't go crazy throwing him all the way into the top 30 and starting him no matter what. Given the usage and the targets that he's seen would definitely dictate he's worthy of a start, but this is a brutal matchup, and I think Jameis Winston might not have as easy of a time as he did against Baltimore last week. David Njoku, pretty good matchup there, league average matchup. He's in your lineup, and the Los Angeles Chargers defense is definitely in a very good spot here. Jameis Winston, very notoriously known for throwing interceptions, so definitely a viable streaming defense there. Commanders at Giants, Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors reunite here for this game. Second time this season that they've played, and of course Malik Neighbors had like 20 targets in that game and like a 65% target share. So definitely be on the lookout for Malik Neighbors to have another big game. Although the Commanders defense has been better in recent weeks, they've held a number of teams that maybe should have scored more to less points than we were thinking. They still are definitely exploitable, particularly with Benjamin St-Juste, who is Malik Neighbors' primary matchup there. So definitely fire him up. Obviously, you were going to start him anyway. And definitely, if you are a Malik Neighbors manager, don't panic. If you are not a Malik Neighbors manager, go buy him low. We talked about him in the trade targets video yesterday. Jaden Daniels versus the New York Giants pass defense, 19th easiest matchup there, so he is definitely a viable start. Both running backs have above average matchups. If Tyrone Tracy is back from the concussion, he is definitely in your lineup. And of course, Brian Robinson is in your lineup as well. Terry McLaurin is expected to see shadow coverage from Deonte Banks. He has not been a fearsome corner, so I would definitely not be too worried about that. McLaurin should be in your lineup. Stream the Commanders' defense and kicker because we know Daniel Jones is definitely capable of melting down as well, and this game just projects to be pretty high scoring. On the Commanders' side of things, they're implied for 23.5 points, so the kicker is a viable streamer as well. So moving on to the next game, we have the Patriots at Titans, one of the grossest games on the entire slate. For the love of God, let's hope that it is Drake May versus Will Levis and not Jacoby Brissett versus Mason Rudolph. That is the most sexless quarterback matchup I've ever heard of in my life. Either way, you don't want to be starting a whole lot of players from this game. Not a high-scoring game environment. You only need to start your absolute must-start players, and I would say Tony Pollard, I guess, is one of those guys. Ramondre Stevenson may be one of those guys at running back, and I suppose you could throw out there Calvin Ridley as well. Key matchups to look forward to here. Both quarterbacks below-average matchups, so unless Drake May is starting, there's no quarterback in this game that is worthy of a stream. Both running backs have top 12 matchups, though, so Tony Pollard and Ramondre Stevenson in decent spots here. Sit all the Patriots wide receivers and tight ends, particularly if Drake May is out of the lineup. If May is playing, that puts DeMario Douglas and Hunter Henry in play as low-end flexes / a streaming tight end option, but even still, not a very good matchup against a pretty stingy pass defense. Calvin Ridley is expected to see shadow coverage versus Christian Gonzalez. Not a must-start by any means, but he is an okay play given the volume that he saw last week against the Detroit Lions. Could carry over into this next game. Stream both defenses for sure because this matchup expects to be a slugfest, and the Titans defense is my preference, but you could definitely talk me into the Patriots defense, particularly if Will Levis is starting this game for the Titans, which it appears he could. We don't exactly know the status of either quarterback at this time, but I would say it's probably more likely that Levis plays than it is that May plays because the concussion protocol usually results in you missing one game, but we'll have to wait and see on that. So Bears versus Cardinals here, the first 4 p.m. game of the slate. There is 4 of them this week. Cardinals are 1-point favorites right now at home, so a very closely matched matchup here in terms of the teams. The pace of play very fast in this one. Both offenses appear to have league average matchups as far as their offensive DVOA versus the opposing defense. The Cardinals and Bears both in kind of flux right now in the NFC, both teams that need to win to stay in the playoff picture. Caleb Williams versus the Arizona pass defense, very viable this week as a streaming quarterback, 26th ranked Arizona pass defense. Kyler Murray, obviously a pretty much an every week starting type of quarterback, but a tough matchup against the Chicago Bears pass defense. They are 6th against fantasy quarterbacks. DeAndre Swift, 25th against the run, are the Arizona Cardinals. He is in your lineup. James Conner, 8th against the run, are the Bears. He is probably still in your lineup anyways, but maybe a downgrade. Marvin Harrison against the Bears secondary, very tough matchup for him, but he's still in your lineup. Bears wide receivers, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen. DJ Moore is the only must start, I would say, of that group, but you could definitely talk me into Keenan Allen or Rome Odunze in this matchup because I like Caleb Williams in the passing game in general. And then Trey McBride has a great matchup. Cole Kmet, not so much, but both of those tight ends are probably in your lineup for the most part. So moving into Jaguars at Eagles, we have the Eagles 7.5-point home favorites against the Jags, who are without, presumably, we don't know for sure if Brian Thomas or Gabe Davis are going to be out for this game, but at the very least, their wide receiver core is banged up. Christian Kirk out for the year, Brian Thomas potentially missing this game, Gabe Davis potentially missing this game as well. Stacks up very well for the Eagles. The Eagles 45.5-point over-under. They are implied for 26.5 of those points. Over catching some steam, the Philadelphia DVOA versus the Jacksonville defense DVOA is the best on the entire slate. It looks like it could be smooth sailing for Jalen Hurts, for A.J. Brown, for Devontae Smith, and for Dallas Goedert. All 3 of those respective positions, the Jaguars are 32nd against. So anytime you play the Jacksonville Jaguars, start your quarterbacks, start your wide receivers, and start your tight ends because it is very smooth sailing for those type of matchups there. The running back position, obviously there is going to be some flux when it comes to Travis Etienne potentially playing this week, which it appears he's going to. The Eagles are more so a pass funnel defense, so you don't usually want to run against them. So tough matchup for Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, and company on the Jags side of things. Of course, Saquon Barkley has just an easy of a matchup as the rest of the Philadelphia Eagles offense. And then if you are looking for some defense and kicker type of stuff, definitely streamable Eagles defense and kicker if you need to. Again, I wouldn't mess with Trevor Lawrence. I wouldn't mess with any Jags wide receivers unless you are completely desperate and have to play Gabe Davis if he plays, or obviously Brian Thomas is playing, he's in your lineup. But if you have to start Parker Washington because all of these guys are out, I don't blame you. But I think the only guy that's actually a must start on the Jaguars side of things is Evan Ingram at tight end because he expects to get a lot of targets given all of the injuries at that position. Moving into probably what we would consider to be the game of the week, the Lions at Green Bay Packers, 3.5-point road favorites are the Detroit Lions. Over under of 48.5 points, over catching 97% of the money. So a very good chance that Jordan Love is expected to play given the betting trends that we're seeing right now. So if you're worried about Jordan Love, if you're worried about Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, whoever else you're worried about, I would expect that Jordan Love plays in this game. This game is simply too important for him not to play through an injury so I would expect him to be out there. The offensive DVOA matchups are as follows. You guys can see them there. The key matchups to pay attention to, both quarterbacks have below average matchups, so you don't have to start Jared Goff, you don't have to start Jordan Love, but I have both of them inside of my top 15 or so quarterbacks because I do think they are definitely playable. Jordan Love, my preference of the two, assuming he's 100% healthy and plays, even if he's a little bit hobbled, I think he's a fine play. Both running backs below average matchups, but you are definitely firing up Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, and Jahmyr Gibbs because they are just every week starters at that position. Jaden Reed and company, Romeo Doubs and all those guys versus the Detroit secondary, very easy matchup, particularly for Jaden Reed in the slot. He has a chance to have a big-time bounce back if you want to buy low on him right now. That would probably be a good idea, given the fact that it's been a couple games since he had a blow-up performance. Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Kayshawn Nixon in the slot. Overall, the Packers' pass defense is 6th, but Kayshawn Nixon specifically is actually the best corner on the defense as far as, the amount of targets that he allows and the fantasy points per route run that he's allowed. So Amon-Ra St. Brown in for a little bit of a tougher matchup. Sam Laporta, 31st easiest matchup here, or 31st hardest matchup, the second easiest matchup versus the Green Bay Packers tight end defense. So Sam Laporta, definitely a great play, especially knowing that Amon-Ra St. Brown has a tough matchup. Jameson Williams still suspended for one more game. And then Tucker Kraft, also very difficult matchup against the Detroit Lions, safeties and linebackers. They've been very good at defending the tight end position. It looks like this could be the week that Tucker Kraft comes back down to earth. Moving into the Rams at Seahawks, which is the final of the 4 p.m. games that we're looking at here. Divisional matchup, both teams got to have it. I would say the Rams for sure have the edge given that they're 1.5-point favorites and that they're fully healthy on offense. We don't know if DK Metcalf is going to play in this game or not. If he doesn't, then it looks like the Rams are going to be in position to have a pretty good performance. The over-under on this game is 48.5 points, so pretty high total. Pace of play second highest on the slate. Both offenses have top 12 matchups on the slate as well, so the points could be firing fast and furious in this one. Matthew Stafford versus the Seahawks defense is one of the best streaming quarterbacks this week, especially now that Kupp and Nakua are back and they had 10 days to recover even more from the injuries that they were coming off of. I feel very good about Matthew Stafford in this matchup. Geno Smith, however, not as much against the Rams defense that is 13th against fantasy quarterbacks, and particularly the last month or so, they have been very tough on fantasy quarterbacks. Both running backs have top 12 matchups, so you're firing up Kenneth Walker and Kyron Williams. Not like I'm breaking any news to anybody there, but especially because they have great matchups, they're great plays. Both wide receivers have bottom 12 matchups as well, so definitely not a must start on a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba or Tyler Lockett. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and DK Metcalf, if he plays, are absolute must starts. And given the game environment, again, I suppose you could throw out JSN, Tyler Lockett, and see what happens. It's just that those guys have been, a little inconsistent, and if Metcalf is back, that projects that he is going to be the number one. He has been all season. He has been clearly the alpha of that offense. JSN kind of been relatively just a check down Charlie. Tyler Lockett has been inconsistent. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But if Metcalf is out, I think the maximum you could put Tyler Lockett and JSN for is like top 36 wide receivers. For, again, game environment is definitely great, but it's not a great matchup against a strong Rams secondary. If you need a streamer at tight end, Noah Fant, definitely a viable option. 26th easiest matchup for him there. And the Rams defense definitely in play here, especially if Metcalf is not out there. Even though it's a road matchup, they are favored. And if Metcalf isn't playing, and like I said, the Rams have been playing really well on defense, I think that's definitely a viable matchup that you can use. Colts at Vikings. You guys can see Sunday Night Football, the first Sunday night game I think we've seen from the Colts. We will have Joe Flacco starting this game, not Anthony Richardson. As we heard throughout the week, Shane Steichen moving to Joe Flacco for the foreseeable future. Probably, maybe not for the rest of the season altogether, but definitely for the immediate short-term future here. The Vikings are 5.5-point favorites. The over-under is actually pretty high at 46.5 points. Pace of play, 27.6. Minnesota DVOA is a pretty nice advantage over the Colts defense. Key matchups to pay attention to: Sam Darnold versus the Indianapolis pass defense. Very good matchup for him. him. Definitely a streamable quarterback this week. Aaron Jones versus the Indianapolis run defense. Definitely a very good play this week as well. Jonathan Taylor has a tough matchup against the Minnesota run defense. We've seen them shut down running back after running back, pretty much outside of Kyron Williams last week. They've been nails against fantasy running backs all season. Both wide receivers have top 10 matchups, so fire up your Justin Jefferson, of course. Everybody knew that. Fire up your Jordan Addison as a good flex play. Fire up your Josh Downs, your Michael Pittman. Because Joe Flacco is starting, those guys become more viable, so all 4 of those wide receivers definitely in play, especially given the over-under. Stream TJ Hawkinson. He is coming back this week. It sounds like he shouldn't have many limitations as well. 28th easiest matchup for him. And I do think the Minnesota pass defense is definitely in play because Joe Flacco is prone to turning the ball over, and they are 5.5-point home favorites. So the final game that we're going to talk about here is the Buccaneers at Chiefs, Monday Night Football. I am very scared as a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan that we're going to get laughed out of the building against Kansas City because we are down our top 2 receivers. Our defense has played like a hot, steaming pile of dog shit this past month. They have allowed over 34 points per game. They can't stop anything, run or pass. It doesn't matter. Kansas City is 8.5-point favorites at home against Tampa Bay here, over catching 95% of the steam at a 45.5-point total, and the Chiefs are actually favored, or implied, for 27 of those points. So Kansas City in a very good spot to have a pretty good performance here. Patrick Mahomes versus Tampa Bay, easy matchup here. I'm actually really caught between a rock and a hard place here between Dak Prescott in the Flock League and Patrick Mahomes. Now, both guys have very good matchups. They're 2 of the highest over-unders on the slate, but Mahomes hasn't been as good as Dak Prescott, at least as far as like the big blow-up performances have been, but Mahomes has better peripherals as far as how many points the Chiefs are implied for, so on and so forth. So that is my conundrum this week. We'll have to wait and see what I end up choosing. Of course, I do have Travis Kelce in that league as well, so I might just go with the tiebreaker of Mahomes. Baker Mayfield and the Bucs wide receivers, brutal matchups. I don't think you have to start Baker. I don't think you have to start McMillan. I don't think you have to start whoever you're thinking of starting for the Buccaneers, outside of really Bucky Irving, I would say, and maybe Rachaad White as well. There's no real must starts, and maybe Cade Otton too at the tight end position because he's been very good as of late. If you need some flex options this week, DeAndre Hopkins and Xavier Worthy are definitely viable options. This Tampa Bay secondary has been brutal at allowing the big play especially, so watch out for Xavier Worthy to maybe break a long one this week. Both tight ends have top 8 matchups, so definitely fire up Travis Kelce, definitely fire up a streaming option like Cade Otton as a top 10 tight end this week. And then the Kansas City defense and both kickers are in play as far as the special teamers. So let's get into some streaming quarterbacks, streaming tight ends, and then we'll get into some streaming defenses and kickers. I did this last week. You guys seem to really like it. Streaming quarterbacks, some of my favorite streaming options this week. Kirk Cousins, QB8 in my rankings in that high-scoring game environment against the Cowboys. He is my favorite streamer of the week. Sam Darnold against the Colts on Sunday Night Football, as I just alluded to. Also a very good streaming quarterback. Bo Nix and Matthew Stafford, some lower-end guys. Stafford, my preference of the two. But Bo Nix, if you have to really dig deep at quarterback, also a viable option. Stafford against the Seahawks and what projects to be a pretty high-scoring game. Bo Nix against the Baltimore Ravens. So, streaming tight ends. If you guys need a tight end option this week because you got Freiermuth on bye or George Kittle on bye, I'm in this position in one of my leagues that I have George Kittle. Dallas Goedert, the premier option against the Jags. TJ Hawkinson, also a viable option if you're coming off of your IR spot. Throwing TJ Hawkinson into your lineup, I think he's fine. Noah Fant and Juwan Johnson, if you have to go to the waiver wire to grab one of these tight ends, I think those two guys are very viable if you have a bye week. And then getting into the streaming kickers and defenses, I got Evan McPherson of the Bengals, Jake Elliott of the Eagles, Chase McLaughlin of the Buccaneers as my kicker 8 through 10. Obviously, you're starting Brandon Aubreys and Younghoe Koo's and, Kaimi Fairbairns, Justin Tucker's, guys like that. But if you do need to go to the waiver wire for a kicker, I think some of these guys should be available. If you have to dig really deep for a kicker, I also like Brandon McManus of the Packers. Streaming defenses to look for, the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Jags with no receivers. Seems like one of the best defenses on the week for me. Chargers against Jameis Winston. We all know he can melt down at any point. Kansas City Chiefs versus Baker Mayfield without his receivers, also a very solid matchup. Again, it doesn't show that it's a good matchup, but most of that data is with Baker Mayfield having Evans and Godwin. And then Minnesota Vikings versus Joe Flacco. I think they can heat him up, get some turnovers potentially. And then the Saints versus Bryce Young, also a very solid streaming defense there. So if I helped you set your lineups, if I gave you some good streamers, leave me a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here, if you guys want more content, if you want our rest of season rankings, dynasty stuff, Get your team reviewed, ask us a question. All of that is available over on flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE when you either sign up for a subscription or when you ask us a trade question, start sit question, or team review. And you can get up to 30% off and 7 days for free on the subscription, 6 months for free when you sign up annually. If you sign up annually for a Mother Flocker package, you also get a free team review when you use the promo code FSE. So make sure to check all that stuff out if you're interested. But with that being said, actually, hold on. I almost forgot something here. We need to shout out our Thursday Night Football Pickems. You guys can see them on the screen right now. I did break down a 4 Pick'em entry on my TikTok earlier today, but I do want to just give a quick shout out to it in case you guys don't have TikTok. Joe Mixon higher than 110.5 receiving plus rushing yards. He's been over this total in every single game this season that he's been healthy. Xavier Hutchinson, 19.5 rushing plus receiving yards. He was the number 2 in terms of route participation behind Tank Dell last week. Feel like he could get there this week against the Jets on Thursday night. Higher than 8.5 rushing yards for CJ Stroud. He's rushed the ball at least 3 times in 5 of his last 6 games, and he's been over that total in 5 of 8 games this season. And then I used a discount. They had a discount token in the lobby for me for Breece Hall, so I lowered his rushing yards to 57.5. But if you cannot get that total, I don't actually hate his over at 67.5 as well. And if you want to tail these picks, you guys know what to do. Head on over to Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up. You'll get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. You can add in the CJ Stroud free square if you are a new customer. When you make a deposit, when you use promo code FSE, and you make a play on the site like tailing this pick, you also get our weekly start sit rankings manifesto, which is where all of the data from this video came from, for free, emailed directly to your email inbox for the rest of the season. So hit the link down below in the pinned comment for either of those 2 things if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.